Hello guys, welcome to the Alrasta channel to discuss and explain the exciting storyline of your favorite series SwallowedStar episode 180. In the previous episode, we saw Luo Fung and his new team come under attack from Palati of the automaton race, who sent thousands of machine soldiers. After a fierce battle that left Tai Wo's team nearly helpless, Luo Fung, as the Dark Horse, sprang into action in his 9th Janssen form, can rival immortals, and led Tai Wo's team to victory. The destruction of a large number of their machine soldiers forced the Palati to retreat after suffering heavy losses. However, this was only the beginning of Luo Fung's battles on the extraterritorial battlefield, which was filled with relentless combat. What happens next? Alright, without further ado, let's dive into the story. In the middle of their journey, Luo Fung and his team were enjoying some free time watching a drama from Earth that moved them all to tears, still focused on their initial goal of searching for enemy positions hiding around the shattered star area. "Dramas from Earth are really the best to watch," said the captain. Meanwhile, Luo Fung, who was watching, couldn't help but reminisce about the time he proposed to Shushin, those beautiful days. Meanwhile, Yanqi imagined what would happen if he proposed to Meinu, one of Tai Wo's team members. Not long after, Wei's pet cat was seen pouncing on Du Yao's plant. Well, it turned out to be just a nightmare, guys. Du Yao woke up briefly, and since everything was still calm, he went back to rest like the others. Does that dream signify something bad? Who knows? Then, Du Yao fell asleep again next to the flower named Amo. Next, we will move on to a ship belonging to the insect race, but at that time the ship had already been taken over by a group of creatures from the demon race. One of them, named Tuo Lu, complained because he was forced to eat dried insect bodies, which tasted awful. Because he was extremely hungry, Tuo Lu desperately wanted some fresh meat. As Tuo Lu grew increasingly desperate for fresh meat and continued to ramble disturbingly, one of his companions, Fu Wei, severed Tuo Lu's neck to silence him. Seeing their boss's lack of appetite, the silver-bodied demon soldiers continued to eat dried insects voraciously. Fu Wei, who seemed annoyed with Tuo Lu, suddenly detected a battle wave 10 million kilometers away from their current location, and they were heading there. Seeing this golden opportunity, Fu Wei asked Tuo Lu to hold off on eating for a moment because they would soon get the fresh meat they wanted. It turned out that Tuo Lu, whose neck had been slashed, was still alive. Well, this isn't surprising, as many immortal-level beings can do such things. The battle wave detected by the demon race originated from Tai Wo's team, who had just finished a battle against another machine race. After fighting for half a year, the total contribution points collected were only 32 million. Which was still insufficient. According to Luo Fung, they needed to think of a more efficient way to earn contribution points faster and more accurately in the shortest possible time. "Collecting contribution points is necessary," said the captain, "because they have been fighting for quite some time, and after looting enemy items, they must return to base to rest." However, while they were busy looting enemy items, 2 giant fireballs appeared from another direction and headed towards them. The fireballs with strong pressure came from a dangerous immortal figure, indicating that there were still powerful warriors from other races that Tai Wo's team had to face. Tai Wo used a light energy release to destroy the 2 giant fireballs before they landed. In fact, the explosion created knocked the team members back. However, they managed to hold their positions. The aura of the immortal warrior's firepower felt familiar to Du Yao as the boy began to clench his fists. Who would be the enemy to attack them next? When Luo Fung used his mental detection abilities, which could cover thousands of kilometers, he discovered that the attack was carried out by a group of species from the Chu Shi clan of the demon race. They were said to be a type of energy life form known for their cruelty, as they often carried out bloody massacres and liked to devour the bodies of living creatures. Thus, they earned the nickname Corpse Eaters. The Mosha clan is also an energy life form, but the Qiushi type has a fixed form as a scaled creature. The Mosha clan, on the other hand, has no fixed form and can mimic the forms of other living creatures. Well, when it comes to species rankings, the Mosha are obviously above the Qiushi. After observing the corpse-eating creatures closely, Du Yao finally became convinced that they were the ones who had caused the death of Tai Wo's team member, who was called the Seventh Brother. Du Yao, who was called Zhao Chen by the Seventh Brother, turned out to have a very close relationship with him, like a real brother. In the extraterritorial battlefield, the Seventh Brother had often come to Du Yao's aid during critical moments, which might explain why they had grown so close. However, during a battle against the ruthless Qiushi clan, he was killed by one of the scaled creatures. Worse still, the creature devoured the body of the Seventh Brother, leaving Du Yao to witness the horrifying scene firsthand. That's why Du Yao felt so emotional when he saw his old enemy, who had killed his Seventh Brother, reappear before him. Du Yao's eyes reddened as he pointed at the enemy and said that they were the sworn enemies of Team Tai Wo. The old members of Team Tai Wo were filled with a desire for revenge. However, they were now in a disadvantageous situation. The enemy had 2 immortals and 20 world masters. Meanwhile, Team Tai Wo only had 1 immortal, and the rest were at the world master level. Regardless of the enemy's numerical advantage, Du Yao, who was desperate for revenge, acted impulsively and approached the enemy brutally. He activated battle mode and began unleashing Amo, his green plant, to capture the enemies. Just like Team Tai Wo remembered their enemies, the group of lizard-like creatures also remembered that Team Tai Wo was the enemy who had fled during their previous battle. However, unexpectedly, upon meeting again, instead of fleeing, they returned to confront them. At the start of the battle, Du Yao exchanged attacks with Tuo Lu, a green-scaled creature wielding 2 daggers as weapons. What made Du Yao even more enraged was when, during the fight, Tuo Lu revealed that the warriors from the Tai Wo team he had previously devoured tasted exceptionally delicious. The taste was so vivid that he could still remember it, even though years had passed, as if there were still remnants of flesh stuck between his teeth. Because Du Yao charged forward first, he was automatically surrounded by enemies who immediately closed in on him. To free Du Yao from the encirclement, Captain Tai Wo released an energy attack from a distance, containing the power of space and light. The attack sent the enemies surrounding Du Yao flying back. Captain Tai Wo said, "We're teammates. Why are you going alone?" It's not just Du Yao who has a grudge against those scaly creatures, but also Mainu, Wei, and Tai Wo too. Even the cat feels the same way as Du Yao. They all want to destroy those cruel scavengers. That's why they must fight together and not go alone. Before that, the captain explained to Luo Fung and Yanxi that the enemies in front of them were sworn enemies who must be destroyed. The entire Tai Wo team shouted "kill" in unison before finally moving forward and starting the battle. As the strongest member of the team, Tai Wo took on the responsibility of fighting Fu Wei, who was also an immortal. In the early stages of the battle, the captain unleashed a series of heavy attacks, striking Fu Wei so hard that he was thrown into the asteroids nearby, shattering them, and sending his body crashing into the stars. Of course, despite the brutality of the attack, such an assault was still insufficient to defeat the enemy. The close-range battle between the two continued unabated. On the other hand, Du Yao, still overcome with emotion, had to fight Tuo Lu, who had eaten his brother. Du Yao took the fight very seriously. Meanwhile, Tuo Lu felt like he was playing with a weaker enemy. 3,261 years ago, Du Yao still clearly remembered the death of his 7th brother, who died trying to save him. Since then, Du Yao had been relentlessly concocting and researching potions, which he intended to use exclusively to fight Tuo Lu and the scaled creatures in his group. Du Yao underwent a physical transformation, growing from his previous short stature to the size of an adult after gaining surplus strength from the green plant, a power sourced from Amo. The green vine also grew larger and stronger. In addition to targeting Tuo Lu, the plant also ensnared 2 enemies at the World Master level, who were captured and destroyed with ease. In that brutal battle, Du Yao pushed his strength to the absolute limit. He even went berserk, unleashing all the power he had been preparing for so long. But was that enough to defeat Tuo Lu, who was of a higher level? While Du Yao was going crazy, on the other side, Luo Fung and the others who were facing enemies at the World Master level seemed to be having quite a hard time. They weren't just ordinary soldiers. Mainu's illusory powers had no effect on them and could be easily broken. Illusory powers were said to be useless against the Chu Shi clan because those scavengers had grown up in slaughter since childhood. They had been filled with madness from the start, making it difficult to kill them using illusions or trickery. Only absolute power could be used to defeat those creatures. Du Yao, who had realized this long ago, was now using all his strength to face Tuo Lu. However, every plant stem that tried to entangle him was cut to pieces by the enemy's dangerous slashes. With arrogance, Tuo Lu said that Du Yao was considered to have offered no resistance, relying only on the life force of plants. Higher strength and level were the only assets needed to win a battle. Nevertheless, Du Yao paid no heed. He continued to launch the attacks he had prepared, fighting alongside Amo, the green plant, and charging blindly at the enemy. Du Yao persisted even as his plant attacks were constantly sliced apart by the enemy like vegetables. At that moment, Du Yao knew his strength was still insufficient to defeat Tuo Lu, who was of a higher level. But that kid knew no such thing as surrender and continued to fight for revenge. The members of Tai Wo's team who were fighting the enemy soldiers still hadn't finished their battle. The problem was that after they slashed and cut, the severed bodies of their enemies could reconnect as if nothing had happened. Yanshi looked extremely annoyed, even though his enemies weren't very strong. Even attacking with his bare hands was enough to defeat them. But in reality, the battle seemed endless because his enemies could regenerate as energy life forms. Luofeng, surrounded by enemy soldiers, was able to easily defeat them. And at that moment, Luofeng saw a strange round object emitting blue energy from one of the enemies. Upon seeing the strange round object, Luofeng thought that it must be the opening he had been looking for. On the other side, Tuo Lu had no trouble dealing with Du Yao. While continuing his slashing dance attacks, he said that Du Yao's attacks were too weak and too slow, posing no threat to Tuo Lu. However, it was clear that Du Yao was fighting with all his might, shouting that he would avenge his brother. In the end, Tuo Lu began to fight back with his 2 daggers coated in a fire element, moving quickly and destroying all the green plants aimed at him, before finally landing a direct attack on Du Yao's body, which was also pushed far away toward a planet. The impact of the strong pressure released by Tuo Lu caused the asteroid to explode as Tuo Lu passed through it. While Du Yao was in the enemy's grasp in another direction, Luo Fung finally opened the way to victory for his team by using the 9th form of Yanshen, Pan Rival Immortal, which allowed his sword to blink to the target and direction quickly. After slicing through the enemy soldiers, Luo Fung used his mental strength to pull a blue-colored object from within the enemy's body, believed to be its life core. In the end, using his mental strength, Luo Fung gathered it and flew it high into the sky before finally slicing through the enemy's life core in front of him. As expected, after the enemy's life core was destroyed, the bodies of the enemy soldiers suddenly exploded on their own. Our MC's technique is indeed very powerful, guys. Du Yao, who was in a difficult situation, tightly gripped by his enemy, recalled the moment when his brother died in the past. Not wanting to remain silent and be humiliated and oppressed by his enemy, Du Yao fought back by releasing another plant from his back. This forced Tuo Lu to release his grip and prepare to deliver an execution strike directly at Du Yao. However, before Tuo Lu could strike at Du Yao's neck, his body was violently thrown backward, colliding with the debris of an asteroid as the ninth form of Luo Fung's Yanshin armament suddenly appeared. After being hit by that attack, Tuo Lu was completely taken aback. He never expected that there was still someone in the opposing team who could rival the immortal level. Luo Fung grew increasingly worried about Du Yao, who was once again drinking the potion from his shoulder despite it nearing its limit. If he continued to force himself, there was a chance that the kid's body would be destroyed. However, Du Yao's body appeared unable to sustain his adult transformation form. Not long after, boom! He shrank back to his original size. It had only been a few seconds since he transformed. At that moment, Du Yao recalled his past, when he had once handed over ammo to his seventh brother. Du Yao was sure that his brother would be formidable if he used his plants to combat enemies. His brother had promised to accept it after Du Yao finished collecting the basic military contribution points he needed to gather. But before the promise could be fulfilled, his seventh brother died first. After remembering that, Du Yao in the present once again went on a rampage, unleashing relentless attacks on Tuo Lu. Despite appearing to be in a bloodied state, he continued to fight. Du Yao moved directly toward his enemy and stabbed him with a dagger. Although his action was very reckless, that was exactly what Du Yao wanted. When the enemy's dagger pierced deep into his body, Tuo Lu was unable to let go of his weapon. Seeing his chance, Du Yao took out his Amo plant stem and wrapped it around Tuo Luo's body until it was destroyed, and boom! After launching the attack, Tuo Lu's body completely vaporized, while Du Yao survived. The grudge had been avenged, but the battle was far from over, as Fu Wei was still fighting Captain Tai Wo. Even facing Captain Tai Wo alone was already a challenge, and now he had to contend with Luo Fung and Du Yao, world masters whose power could rival that of an immortal. This put Fu Wei in a difficult situation. If Tai Wo's team joined forces against him, he would be finished. Rather than die, Fu Wei ultimately chose to escape, sacrificing 10% of his immortal energy to create an explosion. When the explosion occurred, even though it was only 10%, it was enough to send Luo Fung and his team flying far away. When the explosion happened, Luo Fung protected his body with Shi Wu's wings, and the rest of the team gathered around and took cover behind Tai Wo's captain. Unfortunately, the enemy quickly escaped from the location. Du Yao was extremely frustrated that the last enemy managed to escape, but for the captain, this was a decent outcome. They had managed to reduce the enemy's immortal body strength by 10%, which was equivalent to losing 10% of their soul. Even hundreds or millions of years would not be enough to fully restore that lost 10% of the soul. Shortly after, Team Tai Wo looted the area briefly before finally leaving. At the end of the episode, we see the cat carrying the enemy's world ring. Is there anything suspicious about that ring, guys? Instead of speculating, let's just wait for the next episode. Alright, thank you for watching until the end. And don't forget to support this channel with likes, subscribe, and comments. That's all from me. Bye.